welcome everybody. So this webinar is called Zero Waste Myth Busting, busting myths, answering questions, and addressing rumors about the recycling, composting, and zero waste world. My name is Rosie Briggs. If you don't know me, I am the Community Education and Engagement Manager here at EcoCycle. And if you're not familiar with EcoCycle, we are the local recycler for Boulder County. So if you put something in a recycling bin around the county, it comes to us. And then we're also a nonprofit organization that works on outreach and education and infrastructure and legislation for everything zero waste. So in this webinar, I'm going to talk about the myths that I hear most often when I'm doing outreach in the community, which is all day long. And I know that you all, if you're tuning in, you're probably pretty well versed on zero waste already. If not, that's totally fine too. But I know that a lot of you tuning in will see some of the myths that I'm going to present and be like, I already know that's wrong. But I want to tell you that kind of my intention for this webinar is not only, like busting the myths, but also specifically giving you the tools and information you need to answer these questions and bust the myths yourselves. If you come across them, if you're talking to your neighbor about recycling and they're like, recycling's a bunch of hooey, then you can be like, I have my little cheat sheet with talking points on why it is not hooey. So yeah, there are 10 myths, and for each one I'm gonna go through them, answer the question, and then give you like a little cheat sheet with talking points. Okay, so if you have not been on these webinars before, so this is a webinar style Zoom. So that just works best for us to accommodate all of the people who tune in. Again, there's more than 100 people right now. That's usually what we've been getting, which is awesome. And so you're muted and your video is off, which might be a relief. Maybe you're in your jammies, maybe you're cooking dinner, whatever. Maybe you're listening to Ghostbusters and you don't want us to hear. So you can interact with us in the chat box. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box. It's like a little speech bubble, and you can click on that, and you can click on the blue button that says hosts and panelists, and you can change it to everyone. And that means that when you just type in the box, everyone who is tuned in will see it. And this is a good place to kind of have ongoing commentary, or like make little jokes, or like provide resources, or answer something that I ask, like how much do you like the Ghostbusters theme song. This is just usually a cute little, like, I love the chat box every single time we do one of these, because it's just everyone is like interacting and being friends, and it's the best. And if you have questions that you actually want me to answer, I'll do questions at the very end. And if you have a question that you actually want me to answer and address to everybody, then put it in the Q&A box, which is over on the right, and then we'll go through that at the end. But like the chat box, just use it as you go. I won't necessarily see it because I'm talking, but I'll see it as much as I can. Okay. And yeah, again, just one more time because it's confusing. If you want everyone to see it, click on everyone rather than just panelists. If you just click on panelists, it'll just go to me and Ari. Okay, so this is my October, yes, and the cheat sheet will be something that you will get after this. I'll send out all the slides, so no worries on that. Okay, I'm already out of breath, you guys, I'm so excited. So this is my October webinar. So there is a heavy Ghostbusters theme if you haven't picked up on it, but bear with me because pictures of Dan Aykroyd in the 80s is how I learn best. That's just my learning method. Okay, next slide, Ari, let's go. So we're gonna start with the land acknowledgement because yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day. So EcoCycle sits upon the land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, and 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. That's something that I'm trying to remember to do at the beginning of all my webinars. Okay, so we're gonna start with the myths. So we're going to start out with kind of some broad ones to set the stage for some of our more in-depth ones. And the broad ones tend to take up more time to bust, so don't worry, some of them are much shorter than this. Okay, so we're gonna start with myth number 1 is recycling uses more energy, money, and or resources than it saves. So I first heard this one in high school when my environmental club was trying to improve recycling, and my dad's friend told me this, and I didn't know how to respond then, but I do now. So if Roger, you're listening, this one's for you. Roger's not listening, but you know, this is for Roger. Okay, so this myth is false. So we're gonna bust it. Here's our Ghostbusters busting it. All right, so again, we're gonna build our little talking points card for you here. So with these myths, okay, yeah, so I'll start by saying that we generally, when we generally talk about the impacts of recycling like this, we're talking about the net benefit, since each material in the recycling stream, like steel, aluminum, paper, glass, plastic, all of that has a different impact. So people tend to get bogged down really about plastic because we talk a lot about plastics, especially when we're talking about kind of problems with waste and problems with recycling. But don't forget, we have all of these other materials. So when we're talking about recycling as a whole, we need to look at it as a whole system, including all of the materials that are involved. And I'll come back to what role plastic plays in the guidelines in a minute. And then, so the other thing that people tend to forget is that there's downstream, meaning after the consumer, and upstream, meaning before that product gets to you. Oh, I was just informed that there's no E in Arapaho, so I'm sorry that I spelled that wrong on the last slide. Sorry, guys, I will fix it. Okay, Ari, could you go to the next one yet, please? Or wait, did you? You did, my bad, I can't see. Okay, so yeah, so we tend to really focus on the downstream when we talk about zero waste. It's really important to talk about the upstream as well. That's where most people don't put a lot of their focus or education necessarily. And so that's where a lot of these myths come from. So it's not just about landfills and litter, it's about where we got that natural resource, how we extracted it, how we refined it and turned it into a product, and then how we got it to you. So the example that I always use for this is aluminum. So yeah, there's some pictures, sorry. I don't even know when they're gonna pop up, but let's see. So again, people tend to think about waste in terms of the physical waste post-consumer, but they forget what it takes to make that product. So to put it in context, we're gonna start this discussion, sorry, I'm getting emails, with the story that you've probably heard me tell before. So if you have, sorry about it, but it's gonna be a good refresher so that you can tell the story to the next person who tells you that recycling is fake. So the story of aluminum. Again, this is just the story of one specific material, and when we talk about recycling, we can really be talking about any material, which I'll talk about in a second, but it illustrates really well how much sense recycling makes in the context of natural resource conservation, as well as economic context, and the context of the climate crisis. So I think a lot of people, when they think about recycling, they're like we have bigger problems, who cares about the can? But this is a good example of why that can does play into those bigger issues. Okay, so this is the abridged version. I'm not going to tell you the entire aluminum story, but in order to make aluminum, we have to mine a mineral ore called bauxite. And we almost always get this mineral ore from the tropics, about more than 90% of the time, because that's just where enough weathering has happened to form the bauxite. And so as folks who care about the environment, we know that the tropics are really crucial to preserve. It's not only the most precious resource or precious source of biodiversity on the planet, but it also provides essential ecosystem services, carbon sequestration and oxygen production and cleaning water, all of that stuff. So in order to mine this ore from the tropics, they clear cut those very precious trees, which means cutting down those valuable tropical habitats and clearing vegetation and slashing and burning and all of that ugly stuff. And we are not fans of that. And so wide swaths of habitat are destroyed, as is the ability of the forest to moderate local weather patterns and moisture and CO2 levels. And so bauxite is strip mined, which means they basically scrape off this entire top layer of the topsoil, and they leave everything underneath exposed to erosion and pollution. And I have a whole other webinar where I go into why this is a huge problem for Indigenous communities in particular, but there's a lot of problems with that. So then from the tropics, it goes all the way up, usually, almost always, to Iceland to be refined and smelted. And these two processes, refining and smelting, are just essentially using a huge amount of energy to turn bauxite into alumina, and then alumina into aluminum. And then from there, it gets shipped all over the world as soda cans or aluminum foil or whatever it's made into. So if you think about us buying a LaCroix, for example, sipping out of it for 2 minutes and then burying it in the landfill where it can never be used again, and then starting the entire process over, that is ridiculous. That's whether or not you care about, you know, any of the stuff that I just said was impacted, that just logically doesn't make sense to do. So it especially doesn't make sense when we could just recycle that can, melt it down in that region locally, and turn it into a new can within 6 weeks and skip that entire upstream nightmare. So a recycled aluminum can saves 95% of the energy that it takes to make a virgin aluminum can. I don't know why I'm showing it with my hands when I have an actual graph right in front of you that shows that. So 95, you can see virgin aluminum, that's the amount of energy it makes to make that can out of virgin aluminum bauxite. And then the little dark bar is how much energy it takes to make a recycled can. So yeah, it saves the rainforest habitat, it saves emissions from all that transportation, it protects water sources for local communities, and so much more. And once we have that aluminum, we can recycle it an infinite amount of times, so we don't need to go back for that bauxite. Once we have a can, we can continue turning it into a can as long as we want. Okay, great. So that's the story of aluminum, is kind of my context for why a lot of these myths even happen, is because people forget about this upstream piece, which is a huge piece of recycling and natural resource conservation. So, but no matter what we're talking about, recycling always means savings. So by recycling, we're saving water and energy and resources and greenhouse gas emissions and money. And according to the EPA, the benefits of recycling to the planet are clear. This is from the EPA. So we just went over aluminum's energy savings, but here's some other energy savings from different materials that you'd find in the recycling. And again, these are savings compared to making those products from virgin materials, meaning those natural resources that we mine from the earth. And this is just energy. So remember we have each material saves a different amount of water and energy and greenhouse gases and all of the things that we're talking about here. We have water, resources saved by recycling paper. So we have energy and water, and you can see the recycled paper is the darker, shorter bar. You can just see that it just uses less energy, uses less water. So yeah, we could really make we can make a similar bar graph for any of the materials in the recycling stream, comparing, again, water, energy, CO2 emissions, trees, whatever you want. But you can see that recycling definitely doesn't use more resources than it takes up, even if we are making that really broad statement and kind of lumping all of the resources together, all of the materials together. And I'll send you guys all of these, the sources that I'm citing and all of that as well in my follow-up email. Okay. Oh, and then we have plastic too. I just threw this in here. So plastic is not our favorite material to recycle, and I'll talk a lot more about that in a minute, but it still has savings and it still makes sense to recycle. So we should do a lot more to reduce, redesign, all of that stuff before recycling when it comes to plastic especially. But it's still, if you have something that's recyclable, like we were talking about a clamshell in Boulder County, still recycle it. It still makes sense. But I'll talk about what makes recycling or plastics a little bit different than the rest of the materials. Okay, so there you have it. Here's our little final talking points slide. And again, I'll send these to you so you can have them for reference. You guys are already putting in things that I'm going to talk about later. Someone just brought up subsidies. Yes, I'll definitely talk about that in a minute. Thank you for bringing your already educated brain to this. Okay, so yeah, we're going to just finish off with the economic point. So people, I've heard before that recycling wastes money or it doesn't economically make sense. I think you can see with all the examples that I've laid out here that that's just logically not true. If we're conserving all these valuable resources, then it makes sense that economically it would also make sense. But overall, when we recycle, we're saving these valuable resources when we're keeping them in circulation in our economy. And when we landfill them, we are literally burying them in the ground so they can never be used again. And I always say, like, if an alien, species came and looked at how we manage our resources, like we're spending all of this time and money and energy, extracting these natural resources and then turning them into stuff, and then we bury them in the ground like a squirrel, except we never come back to get them. The alien species would be like, what a stupid species, what are they doing? That makes no sense at all. So yeah, instead of burning it, we can continue to use it. And so that also means that we are creating jobs. So recycling creates 9 times more jobs per ton than landfilling, because we have to do a lot of stuff to turn new stuff, our old stuff, into new stuff. We have to sort, we have to, you know, melt it down, we have to transport it around. So there's a lot more jobs locally that are created from recycling. So that is myth 1. It's really a macro myth, and it sets us up nicely for some of the rest of them. We're really starting out with some of the bigger ones, and then we're going to kind of narrow it down. So don't be stressed if you think that this is boring and you already know all of this. I hope you don't think that. But if you do, I still have a bunch of Ghostbusters pictures just to spice it up in the meantime. Okay, so myth number 2. So myth number 2 is also a macro myth, and it's very similar. It's really relevant to the other one, but luckily we have a lot of context now to answer this one, now that we just busted myth 1. Sorry, I always get distracted because I look at the chat. Okay, so some people maybe aren't sold on whether recycling is really beneficial or not, and hopefully I've just answered that. But there is a small number of folks that I've certainly heard from, and you might have too, maybe around the Thanksgiving table or something like that, who have kind of a full-on conspiracy theory on recycling, and they think that it's all fully a hoax. It just doesn't exist, and we're lying about it all the time. So this myth says, I grouped 2 together here. So I said recycling is a hoax, it all gets landfilled. And then this kind of part 2 is now that China is no longer taking it. So there's this whole other China piece that came in a few years ago. And so the idea that it's a hoax in general is, I'm just gonna bust it real quick. And then we have the China piece, which is a little more complex, and I'll address that separately. So we're gonna start with the recycling is a hoax in general. Dan Aykroyd is having none of that. He's blasting recycling as a hoax. He hates that one in particular. So, okay, I'm gonna give you, once again, a little cheat sheet on this one. My first point is why would we do that? Why would we make up this elaborate lie to do what? I don't know what the goal would be. So again, we look back at what we just did with myth number 1. It makes so much sense. We're creating jobs, we're making money, we're saving natural resources, we're saving habitat, we're saving our own resource, like our own air and water. It makes sense. That is why we do it. But don't forget that your recycler makes their money from selling those valuable resources to the markets that will turn them into something new. So when you recycle your LaCroix can, your recycler makes money selling that LaCroix can to whoever is turning it into something new. So it makes no sense that we would be actually landfilling it instead of selling it, if selling it was possible. And furthermore, for EcoCycle specifically, we are a nonprofit mission-based recycler, which is a little bit unique, and I'll talk about that also. But we have no stock in landfills. We have nothing to do with a landfill. So we would actually have to pay if we wanted to landfill your stuff. So that means that we would collect your stuff for free, and then we would pay to put it in the landfill. We don't do that. We're not going to do that. So we work very hard to keep our residual trash down as much as possible, which means the stuff that gets put in the recycling that isn't recyclable, we have to pick it out, and then we do have to landfill a certain amount of it, and I'll talk about what that amount is. But it costs us, so that's why we spend so much time and money educating folks to only give us the materials that we want, otherwise it costs us. And then lastly, yeah, recycling is a growing industry, so key to our economy that it was declared an essential industry and service by the Department of Homeland Security. And in 2017, this market was valued at about $265 billion US. And by the year 2024, which is not so far away, the market is expected to grow to about $377 billion US. So I'm just gonna give you the one slide about that one, because sometimes if you're talking to someone who thinks that something, like they have a conspiracy theory about it, you can tell them the information. It won't necessarily change anything, but that's if you want to try. Okay, so now that Dan Aykroyd and I have busted the hoax conspiracy theory, we're going to address all the myths and I keep saying myths and myth conceptions, and I feel like I should have just made that the title. But anyway, myths and misconceptions around China and their role in the US recycling system. So this is a big, frequently asked question that I have received countless times over the last 4 years since it happened. So yeah, this is the China piece of that myth. So in 2017, which, yeah, 4 years ago, China stopped importing recyclables from the United States. This policy was called the National Sword. Sometimes it's also called the Green Fence. So basically, China just told the US to stop sending our recyclables over there. And here's a little cartoon about it. So it really did appear in a lot of major media in a way that recycling really hadn't up until that point. And so since people don't necessarily have a good background on how the industry works or how recycling works or yeah, what's involved, what are the markets, any of that, it created kind of a lot of hysteria and a lot of misunderstanding about it. So we, like, our phones were ringing off the hook as soon as this was published in like the New York Times. There was like NPR, there was a whole lot of stuff about it. And yeah, we're gonna talk about what happened and what it means. So before China stopped accepting recyclables, as a recycling company, there were kind of two approaches that you could take. So the two I'm about to lay out are kind of the two ends of the spectrum, and recyclers can totally lay in between these two ends. These are just kind of the extremes. So approach one, you could either invest a lot in public education to make sure your community is recycling the right things, sorting technology, and staffing, physical people, so that you can separate the materials one from the next. So, you know, aluminum from plastic number one, from plastic number two, from paper, all that, and reduce contamination. And then finding and sustaining local markets that will take those high quality recycled materials coming out of your facility because you invested so much in making them clean. And this is the approach that EcoCycle has always taken. So we've been around since 1976. One of the oldest recyclers in the United States. This is our approach from the very beginning. We are celebrating our 45th birthday this year, and this is how we've always done things. We were never selling things to China. But other recyclers were taking approach number two, or something close to approach number two. So this is where they set vague guidelines, like saying things like plastics 1 through 7. I see that all the time on recycling guidelines where it says plastics 1 through 7, and there's only plastics 1 through 7. That's not specifying anything. It's not giving anyone really any information at all. They kind of skip the community outreach for the most part, invest in less sorting. So again, both technology and human actual sorters. And then they come up with a more contaminated stream because of that. And then local markets won't take that contaminated stream. So they sold it to China. And China was taking more contaminated stuff because they just had more demand for, especially plastic. They were especially taking more plastic than anyone else because think of all the stuff that's made in China that's made of plastic. And they also literally had more hands to sort it. And there was less plastic in the world when they started accepting it. And now there's more plastic. And so since the National Sword, China has said, no, stop. The stuff you were giving us is way too contaminated. Plus, there's just way too much plastic at this point to do anything with. It's not going back into whatever it already was. We're just continuing to think of creative things to turn it into. And I'll talk about this in, I think, 2 myths. But so China was like, we can't, there's nothing we can do with any of this. We're shutting our doors to you. So the recycling programs in the US that relied on sending their materials to China were badly affected at this point. And again, this is 2017. So suddenly their markets were cut off, and they didn't have established markets. And even if they could find those markets, they didn't have the ability to sort to meet the needs of those more picky local markets. So while the rest of us continued to use the markets that we'd always use, they overnight had nowhere to send their stuff. So then trouble came when those who were selling to China started to try to get in on domestic US markets, which again are the markets that we were always working with. And that created a glut on the market, and then it drove prices way down as supply of recyclables far exceeded demand. So that was 4 years ago, and for the most part, recycling programs have survived. And they're using this as an opportunity to invest in getting contaminants out of their stream and building and strengthening local, or at least domestic, markets. So that's, in the long run, that's a really good thing. And it's good that China blew the whistle on this kind of shady recycling that was happening anyway, because again, American recyclers were the problem. Again, not EcoCycle, not to, we're perfect. No, but we just weren't selling to China, but also China, there wasn't a whole lot of transparency on what was even happening with the stuff that was sent over there. So it was kind of like an all whistleblowing moment. And so EcoCycle, again, is unique in that we're mission-based and we're nonprofit, and there's only 4 of us in the US for mission-based nonprofit recyclers. And so since we started the first curbside program in the state in 76, recyclers who were taking that second approach, who were selling to China, came to recyclers like us to learn how to create a cleaner stream and more sustainable markets. And so, in fact, we formed a coalition with the other 3 mission-based US recyclers to share best practices with all of the recyclers and lobby for infrastructural change. And I'll send you more information about that. So my bottom line is, while a lot of people were really freaked out about the National Sword when they first read about it or saw it on the news, I always compare it to like when you're a kid and your parent tells you to clean up your room, and so you sweep all the clutter under the bed, and they're like, great job cleaning your room. And then one day they come in and they lift their bed up, and then they reveal all the stuff that's been piling up there because you weren't doing anything real with it before. And that's what the National Sword did. It really lifted up the bed on a lot of US recyclers. And so that's an awesome opportunity for us to figure out, for them to figure out how to do something more sustainable with those materials. And then as a nation, it's a really great opportunity to take a look at like, what is piling up, what isn't being sold, what isn't being recycled, and how can we stop that from being made in the first place? Because we're not going to necessarily be incentivized to stop production of a specific plastic if we're not seeing it pile up. And now that we are, more legislation, in fact, since the National Sword around zero waste has taken place than ever before. Like, we've passed more bills relating to plastic than ever before because we're like, oh, we're in a pig pen of plastic. And like, now that the bed has been lifted, we have to actually address it. So anyway, I appreciate that everyone was freaked out about it. Not everyone, a lot of people were, because they care about recycling. But I also, like, from our perspective, it was a good thing because we want transparency. We want the actual root issue to be addressed. Okay, busted. Next myth. All right, this is a good one. This is a kind of recent one. Myth number 3, recycling isn't worth it. Only 9% of what we put in the recycling bin actually gets recycled. So of course this is related to the first 2, but it's very specific because it's based on a statistic that was widely spread very recently. And I have heard it a lot, and I would love to bust it with Bill Murray. All right. Oh, and someone asked, yeah, who are the other emission-based recyclers? And it's Ecology Center, which is in Berkeley, Eureka in Minnesota, and Recycle Ann Arbor. So those are our 3 mission-based friends that we formed an alliance with. Okay, so back to this 9% myth, statistic. So this is, yeah, again, one I've been hearing really frequently. And I'd like to start by saying that this statistic is not, it's not like a lie, that the 9% is not just like invented. It's just that the statistic is being widely misquoted. And then how it appeared in the myth that I just wrote, that it's only 9% of what we put in the recycling bin actually gets recycled, that is flat out incorrect. And that's how I've been seeing it quoted, and that's not what it is. So it comes from, in 2019, this peer-reviewed journal, Science Advances, published a study that found that globally, only 9% of all plastics ever made have been recycled. So not only is this statistic only referring to plastic and not any other material you put in the recycling bin, but it's not even referring to the plastics that you are putting in the recycling bin. It's referring to all plastics everywhere ever made, not only the ones that you're trying to recycle. So it's not that you're like doing all this stuff and recycling all the correct things and then we only take 9% of it and recycle it. They're saying that out of all the plastics ever made, 9% of them have been recycled. So those are our first 2 talking points for your little cheat sheet. And we're going to keep adding to it by talking about why by talking about why plastics don't get recycled as much as other materials, and why plastic is kind of teased apart as its own category when we talk about all of the materials that we find in the recycling bin. Okay, so there are a lot of reasons that these plastics don't get recycled. So the first is that the majority of plastics being manufactured are simply not recyclable, period. They're just not. They're not recyclable. So think about like the little like wrapper for a butterscotch candy, or like a contact, or like a flip-flop. I could do this all day. I could come up with plastics that are just not recyclable. And these things are simply not recyclable because our infrastructure can't collect them or sort them. Like, how are we going to sort a contact? And there's absolutely no one who wants to buy them and turn them into something new. And they're inherently not good at being melted down and shaped into something new. So they're not recyclable. So why then, if we have if 91% of all the plastics being manufactured are not recyclable, why are we making all of these unrecyclable plastics, you might ask? And I agree. So a big part of the reason that so many unrecyclable plastics are being manufactured is because there's this big disconnect between the recycling system and the plastics industry. So if we look at any other material on the recycling guidelines, so again, cardboard, paper, glass, aluminum, steel, whatever, the folks making the products out of those materials buy back their own material to make new stuff. So from us, the recyclers. So for example, if I am making a LaCroix can, okay, this is not, I'm not like calling out the brand LaCroix, this is just the one that keeps coming to mind when I'm giving examples. So if I'm making whatever, a soda can, I'm most likely gonna buy back recycled aluminum that my customers recycled after they drank out of my can to make new cans, because as we discussed, that makes just way more sense than heading down to the tropics and then bringing the bauxite up to Iceland and doing all the other stuff that we already went over. So, but the plastics industry is in kind of a league of its own here. And somebody already put this in the chat because they are paying attention in the world. Trying to turn on my lamp because I just realized I'm getting very dark. Cool, I'll plug it in a second. It's not plugged in. Okay, so the plastics industry is in kind of a league of its own compared to the rest of the industries whose materials we find on the recycling guidelines, because it's subsidized for them to drill for new oil and gas to make new plastics out of virgin fossil fuels. So they're incentivized financially to do the wrong thing. So not only like are we not requiring that they take responsibility for the things that they put out in the world, but in fact these subsidies are creating this false incentive to just make stuff out of virgin plastics and then ignore all the stuff that they've already made. So without that subsidy, it would make more financial sense, just like the rest of the guidelines, for them to make their product out of recycled materials, which would do three things. So one, it would conserve natural resources, because rather than making all these useless little plastic things out of virgin fossil fuels, they'd be making them out of the plastic that already exists because they already made it. And it would, probably be eventually landfilled otherwise. Two, it would add value to that material, which strengthens the recycling system and adds money back to local economies. So again, in order to add value to a product, someone needs to want it. So if no one wants it, then it's just, oh, I just turned up my brightness. Okay, that helped. So if the plastics industry is buying it back, that adds value to that material. Without that demand, without them buying it back, there's not a lot of value to all of that plastic stuff. And then three, it would incentivize plastics producers to stop making things out of plastics that are unrecyclable across the board, like polystyrene or PVC. It's like a number 6 and number 3. So the reason, like, they're just making all this stuff because they never see it again. And if they had to see it again, if they had to turn it into something new, they would probably stop making it out of all these crap plastics. That's what I call them. Okay, so back to our cheat sheet. We've added some of those points here. So right now, the burden is on the recycler. When I say recycler, I mean EcoCycle, like or your local recycler, whoever is dealing with your recyclables when you put them in the bin. But also the burden is on you, the recycler, because it's confusing for you to know what is recyclable and what isn't. We're all carrying the burden that this plastics industry is putting on us, and they're not carrying it at all. So yeah, as a recycler, the burden is on us, EcoCycle, whatever recycler you have, to figure out how to sort and recycle all these stupid plastics, and we lose money on them. We hate them because the plastics industry, again, doesn't pay for it. They don't pay for the sorting stuff for the most part. They don't buy back their stuff for the most part. These are kind of blanket statements. Sometimes it happens, but generally as an industry, it's not the norm. So much of the plastics that is produced, again, isn't recyclable because they have no reason to consider the recyclability of it when they make it, because they'll never see it again. And if they were the ones buying it back and turning it into new products, they'd be incentivized to only make things out of easily recyclable plastics. So in the absence of that producer responsibility, plastics aren't designed for recyclability. They aren't designed for recycling. And the recycling system in turn isn't designed for plastics. It never was. It was designed before we started recycling plastics for things like cardboard and glass. So overall, still continue to recycle the plastics on your local recycling guidelines, but pay attention to opportunities to hold producers responsible, reduce plastic waste before it's created, and subsidies and other legislative and infrastructural solutions that will kind of turn off the tap on plastics. And I say this a lot, the turn off the tap phrase, and you might not know what it means, so I'll just explain it before I forget. We have this analogy that we use a lot when we're talking about plastics, where if all of the taps in your house were turned on full force and all the water was rushing out and your house was filling up, it was flooding, as a logical person, you wouldn't run. The first thing you do wouldn't be to run to the window and start bailing out water with a little cup. The first thing you do is turn off the taps, and then you deal with the water that's left over. And that's an analogy we use for plastic waste, because we're all like, oh no, how can we recycle a plastic clamshell? And we're trying so hard to bail plastics out the window. In the meantime, all of the taps are still on. We have to turn them off first. And I think Sandy said that in the chat, that it's ridiculous that we're still there's this unending stream of single-use crap being produced, and we're trying to focus on how to get rid of it before we just stop making it. So okay, back to that really quick, back to that wildly misquoted only 9% gets recycled statistic. To put it in a little more really specific context, every materials recovery facility, which we call a MRF, it's just a recycling facility. So the Boulder County Recycling Center, where the stuff comes to, every facility has a different residual rate. So that means the percentage of the material that comes through that isn't recyclable, we have to pull it off and put it in the trash. So after the sorting process is complete. So we all have contamination, of course, in our stream, but we all have a different amount because, again, of what I talked about, how much we invest in making our guidelines really specific and doing outreach to the community and all of that. So at the Boulder County Recycling Center, that number is 10. So that means that out of all the stuff that comes through our facility, 90% of it, 90, is getting actually successfully recycled. And the lowest rate I've ever heard in the US from a facility, from a recycling facility, is 75%. So that means that even if they're not doing well compared to the rest of recycling facilities, they're still recycling 75% of everything that comes through, which that's a lot higher than 9. So you can see why 9% is incorrect, not only because we're not talking about all materials, we're only talking about plastic, and then we're not even talking about plastics coming through a recycling facility, we're talking about all plastics ever made in the history of the world. So yeah, even our worst facilities, just the ones who have the most contamination, are still successfully recycling 75%. And here in Boulder County, we're recycling between 90 and 92%. So we're doing great. Busted. Okay. Myth 4. I really need to figure out how to turn on my lamp because I feel like I can't see anything. So I will hum the theme song of Ghostbusters while I am plugging in my lamp. Talk amongst yourselves. It looks like I'm missing some great chats. I can't wait to catch up.
Rosie, while you're plugging in your lamp, I'm just gonna mention I did throw it in the chat, but if you do have a question, if you could put it in the Q&A box, that would be awesome, because then we'll have it all in one place and we can also mark off once we've answered a question. If you have it in the chat box already, we can go back and look at it, but it is easier if it's in one place. And Rosie is now illuminated, so I will mute once again.
Okay. Oh God, I didn't sing the song. Sorry. I'm trying to see if there's anything I have to address. What is MRS? I think MRF was what I was saying was Materials Recovery Facility, which is just the recycling facility. We call it a MRF. We have a lot of little slang. Okay, cool, great. So myth number 4. This is one of my favorite ones to bust. The waste problem is because consumers are lazy. It's a supply and demand issue. I don't know about you all, but I get this one a lot when I'm out and about talking about recycling. People really want to make it like a market issue, and it's like, oh, people are lazy and they just need their little individual yogurt cups, and like just because people are the worst and that's why we've gotten ourselves into this mess. No. The Ghostbusters they're just giggling at this one. They're just having a laugh because we don't tolerate that myth, this statement here in my webinars. If there's one thing that I say every day, it's that this is not your fault. All I do every day, all day, is interact with amazing people like you who are really concerned about where we are and what's happening and our resources and our future and our planet and our children and all of this stuff. And they feel guilty because they feel like they have created, if not at least contributed to this problem. And I say every single day, you can be part of the solution, and you already are by being here. But the fact that the ocean is full of plastic is not your fault. You did not create this problem. It's not an individual consumer issue. You did not do it. Do not feel like you did it. Also, we can't solve it by taking that approach. Okay, this is the hill I will die on, is this one. Okay, so I had a whole webinar where I talked about environmental justice and kind of the history of oil and gas and plastics and how people are affected in kind of societal framing of recycling and zero waste and all of that stuff. And I will send that out to you if you wanna watch another 2 hours of me talking. My friend Jasmine also talks in that one. So yeah, I went into the history of how waste was intentionally framed as the individual's responsibility rather than the producers in that training. But the bottom line is that since the 50s, single-use products, particularly single-use plastics, have been strategically pushed on to the public. And when I say that, I don't just mean like advertising. Like, I understand that any producer is going to advertise their product, but this is like an entire, very intentionally crafted design, like campaign designed to shift actual culture, not just like specific to products or even brands. It was specifically designed to shift culture away from reuse and repair and reducing and all of that stuff toward single-use culture. So here you can see some post-war single-use packaging ads. This one says, oh God, I'm really blind. Tote those empties or toss them away. Why make hard work of enjoying soft drinks? Every delicious flavor now comes in throwaway steel cans. No deposits, no returns. Throwing away steel cans makes my skin crawl. Steel is such good stuff in the recycling. It's infinitely recyclable. It's so durable. It's so good. And so, yeah. So it's not just, that this product was more convenient. It's that they're specifically being pushed and marketed that way. Throw away and toss away are, two of their big buzzwords here, and they're the main selling points. And it even says, no deposits, no returns, which is just like, now we're trying desperately to get back to the milkman model, to, get back to like refilling and deposits and returns. And we're like, we could have been doing it the whole time. We had this perfect system and then we undid it as if we didn't. Again, it was done. where we undid the system that we already had that made a lot of sense. And now we have to like backtrack and like undo all of this societal stuff that happened because of this very intentional campaign. So since then, the industry has just been exponentially increasing production, all the while funding communications campaigns to make individuals feel guilty about not recycling all the waste that they are throwing at us. And again, it's not getting recycled because 91% of all of the products are not recyclable. It's not because we're failing to recycle them. It's not because we're like, oh, I couldn't be bothered to put in the, no, it's because they are making them not recyclable. So keep America beautiful. Yeah, and so Michael just said what industries sponsor this type of advertising. So that's what I'm about to talk about a little bit, but again, I'll send you out the webinar where I go into much more detail about kind of the history of this issue and the efforts and the industry itself. So, but Keep America Beautiful, if you remember any of the Keep America Beautiful ads, it still exists. But probably the most famous one, which again, I talk about a lot in this other webinar, is the so-called Crying Indian commercial. And so this is a campaign funded by the single-use plastics industry, not overtly, like they don't say, hi, we're Dixie Cup, here's our commercial. They like put themselves behind Keep America Beautiful. That was their name. And so it specifically, and again, very intentionally frames litter and waste as an individual consumer problem. The Native American man in the commercial is crying because you threw the garbage out of your car window. Why did you do that? Now he's crying. Why would you do that? It's like such, oh, it's the worst because it's so ironic. The ones who are making the plastic crap are putting money and resources toward specifically telling us that it's our fault. Like, do you guys see all this plastic stuff everywhere? Why would you let that happen when they are the ones literally who made the plastic stuff? So again, it's not that like they don't understand that it's not their fault or like, oops, we messed up. Like they're specifically putting money that they could have put into making them recyclable or even like helping fund the recycling of their own stuff into a campaign that takes the responsibility, the spotlight off them and puts it onto you so you feel bad about it. So again, I could talk about this for hours. I get very riled up. My face probably got red while I talked about it. Yeah, a brief history of that, but the beginning of why it's not your fault. Ashley says literally awful. Good one. Okay, so this is just, in fact, so as far back as 1975, the plastics industry has admitted that they know the plastics they produce are not recyclable. So it's not that they were like, they made all this stuff and then they were like, oh, whoops, like we wouldn't have done that if we'd known. No, they knew the entire time that it wasn't recyclable. Not only did they not, participate in the solution, but they knew the problem the entire time. And they've invested, again, incredible amounts of money in campaigns to trick the public into thinking that their stuff is recyclable. So you can see the little recycling symbol here. I will talk more about that, but that's just one example. So again, so this is my, consumers aren't lazy. No, we did other things. It's not even a generational thing. It's not like, our grandparents were better at managing resources. It's that this happened in our time. So this system has been carefully built around us and it's designed around single-use products and plastics. And we have to go, like you have to go along with it. It was built around you. You have to go way out of your way to opt for anything else, to opt out of this system. So you're handed, plastic wrapped plastic utensils with every meal, even if it's delivered to your house. I don't know why they assume that you wouldn't have a fork in your house. You're handed a plastic cup with a plastic straw. Even if you're dining in, your vegetables are shrink wrapped when they have a skin on them. That's my favorite. When I say, it's not my favorite, it's my least favorite. When you see a zucchini that like has a skin that was designed by nature to keep it fresh, and they're like, put it on a styrofoam tray and then wrap it in the shrink wrap. You didn't demand this, like to say that it's supply and demand. No, it isn't. You didn't, like, when did you say like, I'm not gonna buy the zucchini unless it's put on a styrofoam tray? No, they just started doing that, and it's really hard to opt out once it happens. So to this day, when EcoCycle sits down with big brands, which we do a lot, I always hear this, we have to get consumers to be better about recycling. We really, those pesky consumers are so bad about recycling. How can we get them better at recycling? That was my impression of a big industry, packaging industry. So we're always, when we hear that, we're always like, no, consumers are not causing this problem. You, the producers, the corporations are causing this problem. You have to fix it. What the heck? They cannot recycle it if what you are making is not recyclable, and they can't avoid needless, wasteful plastic if that's all you're supplying. It's, again, not supply and demand if you're just pumping it out and that's the only thing that's available. I really am like having like asthma because I'm getting so excited about this. Okay, so the other thing, this is to wrap it up. The other thing we have to remember is that the plastics industry and the fossil fuel industry are the same industry. They are one and the same. Plastics are made with fossil fuels. It's the same process, it's just a different product. It's like their side hustle. So they have the same political power, they have the same lobbying money as oil and gas. So with the shift to renewable energy over fossil fuels, you know, so like now we're moving away from fossil fuels in cars and like energy and all this stuff. So as we're shifting away from fossil fuels, big oil is intentionally then ramping up. They have their, you know, their like oil, car, transportation, energy, whatever thing over here, and then they have plastics. And as this goes down, they're like, oh, we better ramp up plastics because we're not going to lose money. We're like, we have to specifically ramp up plastic production because this is our side hustle and we're going to continue to dominate, you know, society. So yeah, they're investing billions of dollars to we're getting close to quadrupling plastic production over the next 30 years. And again, that's not because you demanded it. As we move away from yeah, so okay, sorry, that was just I was about to say the exact same sentence that I just said. So we're not driving it with our individual choices and consumptions. We need producer responsibility laws that hold the producers responsible for recovering the products that they create and circulate, as well as circular economy models, like like the deposit situation that we were trash talking in that 50s ad. So we're fighting upstream right now, and it gets increasingly hard as they ramp up the strategic production. So we need, all of that being said, we need individual solutions like you doing your best, but also infrastructural solutions to fight this intentional influx of material. It's, again, it's an infrastructural problem. We need infrastructural solutions. So not only like plastics should be responsible for in every step, like in recycling, in education, in designing their own freaking things so that they will be recyclable. Okay, so here's our cheat sheet for this. I already have said so much on this that I'm not going to read it all because it's what I just said. But yeah, that sums it up. Overall, I feel like a lot of my job is like being like a waste therapist. Like people are like, oh, like if we get coffee, they're like, oh God, I forgot to say for here. I forgot to say for here. And they gave me a single-use plastic cup. And I'm always like, I like, you are doing your best this is like in the infrastructure that was built around you. It is not your fault. Do you think that the Pacific garbage patch is your fault? No, you didn't do that. Like, cause you forgot to like go out of your way to opt for a cup that should have been reusable as the default. Anyway, that's probably my favorite one to bust. Love that one. Okay, so that was number 4. Here's number 5. This is related because we just talked about the chasing arrows, the recycling symbol, on the slide before last, yeah, where I have the quote, as an example of how the plastics industry is misleading. So this leads me to myth number 5, which is labeling on the package or product tells me if it's recyclable. So this is probably the most common myth that I ever hear. I hear it 14 times a day, I hear it every day, all the time. So people, and I see it all the time, like people when they have their thing are always like looking for the recycling symbol to tell them whether to put that item in the recycling or not. And totally understandable. A lot of these myths, like I'm like, I would understand why you would think that, totally. Obviously in this case, you are trying to do the right thing by looking. You're trying to like go out of your way to recycle. And you don't have a reason to doubt the label. Like, why would you think that they're lying to you? So here is, here's our Ghostbusters blasting the recycling symbol. They're really getting it done. So here's why they're blasting it. Okay, so to talk about why the recycling symbol needs to get busted, we're going to quickly talk about what makes something recyclable. So it's not a lot of people just think like whether something is recyclable is like, could you hypothetically, physically, could you melt it down and turn it into something else? Like, like physically, could you maybe like take it apart and then like reconstruct it into something else? Could it go into something? But they don't understand that there's a whole lot more to the industry. It's an industry. It's not just like a physical process. Recycling is an industry, right? It has buyers and sellers and facilities and markets and transportation. It has all of this stuff involved. It's not just about the physical ability of a thing to turn into another thing. So the two main factors that determine whether something is recyclable is facilities and markets. So facilities means basically, is there a way to collect, sort, and transport this stuff to the market? So glass, for example, glass is, it's beautiful physically as a recyclable. It's easy to melt down, turn into something else. So physically, like if you think that that's the only thing that matters with recyclability, you're like glass, oh, no problem. But the thing is, so yeah, it's infinitely recyclable, but it's also heavy, so it's hard to transport, and it's also potentially dangerous to sort. And if you don't have a good way to collect it and then sort it from other materials, and you don't have like a reasonable way to transport it because you don't have a close by market, then you're not going to be able to recycle it. Like you can't, that's why, you know, in a lot of mountain towns, again, even though glass is like the inherently really good at recycling, at being recycled, in a lot of mountain towns, they're like, we live way the hell up here, way the heck up here. We don't have, like, we're not going to just pile all this incredibly heavy glass onto a truck and be able to, you know, like send it all the way to the nearest glass recycler, which is not very near to us. So, yeah, so facilities just is kind of like all of the infrastructure that you have to collect, sort, and get it somewhere. And then markets is where you're getting it to. So it refers to that someone who wants to buy it and turn it into something new. Again, it's not just about like, could it be turned into something new? It's, is there someone who is willing to buy it and turn it into something new? Is there a want for that material? Is there a demand? So this is a huge piece of the recycling industry that people overlook and don't know about. And it's not, yeah, so again, it's not enough for something to be hypothetically recyclable, which happens a lot. Like a producer will be like, yeah, this is recyclable, and then they'll be like 100% recyclable and write that on the thing. No, we need an actual market who wants to buy that material at a price that at least covers the price to collect, sort, and ship the material, and then create a new product out of it. And otherwise it doesn't get recycled. And that's why it's so important that producers are held responsible for their own materials, because then they would have to understand actually what goes into it. Okay, so these factors change from place to place. So here in Boulder County, at the Boulder County Recycling Facility, we have trucks. We have so many trucks. We have a recycling facility. It's beautiful. If you haven't been, I give tours. The county also gives tours. It's closed right now, but soon I hope it will be open and you will be able to see it in all its glory. It's my favorite thing. We have train tracks running by the facility to be getting those bales to the nearby markets that we have found and established and sustained. Inside that facility, we have conveyor belts and amazing human sorters who are so awesome to watch. And we have super advanced technology. We have lasers. You probably see me do the laser impression that can tell the difference between a number 1 plastic and a number 5 plastic. If a number 1 plastic goes under the conveyor belt, under the laser, the number 1 plastic will be like, PETE, and then it'll like shoot the number 1 PETE water bottle or whatever it is into another tube. So cool. But we didn't used to have that. And so our guidelines used to be different than the guidelines we have now because that technology changed. A lot of recyclers don't have technology like that. They have totally varying, you know, infrastructure and technology and all of that stuff. We also have local or regional markets, and we have the ability to sort our materials to meet the demands or the standards of those markets. And wherever you go, these factors change. So facilities are different, transportation is different, markets are different, reasonable access to all of the above is different. So when those factors change, so do the guidelines. So our guidelines look like, I'll send them out to you. I don't have a slide of them, but they're widely available. I'll send them out to you if you live in Boulder County. But they look different from, again, a Colorado mountain towns guidelines, or Salt Lake City, or New York City, or London, or a town in India, or you get my point. They change because these two factors change all the time. Oh, someone just said consumers buying recycled products. I don't actually talk about this in this webinar, but I talk about it all the time, is that closing the loop on recycled products is something that you as an individual can do when you are buying Paper towels. If you have to buy, you know, a paper towel rather than like a reusable one, buying 100% post-consumer recycled material is a great thing to do. Voting with your dollar, and also you're closing the loop. You're making sure that there is demand for that recycled stuff. Great job. Way to bring it up. Okay, so talking points to bust this myth of the recycling symbol, or just looking at the product to tell you whether it's recyclable. So again, recyclability depends on facilities and markets. Because of this geographic variability in what's recyclable, products really can't be accurately labeled for recyclability, even if the producers mean well. So your soda bottle, whatever, may be labeled with the recycling symbol, but it does not know if you are in rural Kansas or Boston or Zimbabwe. It doesn't know, and it can't tell you whether that bottle is recyclable where you are. You know, you couldn't like look at it and it would be like recyclable in Boulder County or Telluride or Salt Lake City, or, and then like it can't do that. So yeah, so the recycling symbol, the chasing arrows triangle, is a largely unregulated symbol, and anyone can slap it on their product without it reflecting actual recyclability. Someone, I think, I'm like one eye is in the chat box right now. I think someone already brought it up, the recent California legislation. So California just passed a new bill regulating the recycling symbol, since it's largely used as a greenwashing tactic to make products seem more environmentally friendly than they are, not to mention contaminating the recycling stream when well-meaning folks recycle anything with that symbol. So whenever a brand swears up and down that their cup or packing material, whatever, is recyclable, the hard thing for people to understand is that that company doesn't know. It usually doesn't know, first of all, where you are, but also they usually don't understand those two factors, and they don't understand, like, even if they're saying, yeah, hypothetically it's recyclable, they don't know for you regionally, and they also don't know, like, yeah, hypothetically that could happen, but is it happening? Is there a market? Is there the facility to deal with it? So bottom line, rather than relying on the symbol, check with your local guidelines, even though it's harder. Ideally, we would have a universal set of guidelines. We would have a way to universally label things. And honestly, the National Sword brought us a little closer to that, because again, as a nation, we had to look inward and look at our own systems. So, okay, wow, I'm really out of breath, guys. I know I talk too fast a lot of the time, so I think asthma is nature's way of slowing me down. Maybe I'll take a drink. Okay, you're not supposed to be able to read this, don't worry. This is just like a visual aid really quick. So I understand that it's so frustrating to be told about all these greenwashing things, like all these things that you shouldn't really believe, even though it's supplied to you. So we made, Ari and I, who's my assistant behind the scenes right now, we made a guide to spotting zero waste greenwashing earlier this year, and I will send it out to you. I think it's helpful, because there are certain like labels that look legitimate and aren't, and there are certain labels that are legitimate and look legitimate. So being able to tell the difference takes a certain amount of kind of like consumer literacy, which shouldn't be the case. Again, you should be set up for success, but because it is the way it is right now, here is our guide, and I'll send it out to you. So don't worry about reading this, because it's obviously tiny, but I'll send it out to you as a PDF and as a link, because it's also on our website. Okay, myth number 6, come on down. So myth number 6 and myth number 7 are kind of the same. They're like two sides of the same coin. So they're both real quick. And again, you probably know that they're both false, but I will give you a little cheat sheet to kapow, just to bust it when you hear it. So myth, just recycle everything. They'll sort it all out in the facility. Unfortunately, I hear this all the time. So here is a picture of the Ghostbusters looking sassy about that one, positively sassy, because they hate to hear that one. So again, this is pretty short myth to bust. Good news. I won't even have like additional slides. I'm just gonna give you the cheat sheet. So this attitude, just throw everything into the recycling, is what we call wish cycling, and it's often actually really well-meaning. It's often, we really appreciate the intention behind it. It's usually when well-meaning folks recycle everything, like just everything in their house. They're like, I hope it's recyclable, so they put it in the recycling. because they don't want to waste stuff. So like they don't know what's recyclable, but they're like, I hope it is, and they put it in the bin. So as I just mentioned, we do have both machinery and human hand sorters in our facility to separate and sort each material at the recycling facility. But the main task for those machines and folks is to separate one material from another. So we get all the recyclables mixed together in our facility, and we have to separate out aluminum from cardboard, from plastics number 1, from plastics number 2, and so on. All of them have to be separated and then put into separate bales. So that is the main job of that technology and of those human sorters. The sorters are not there to sort through your garbage. That's not what their job is. So when you wish cycle and you hope for the best by throwing something in that you think should be recycled, even if it's not, it slows our process way down, because again, the system is set up to primarily sort and then pick out contaminants that are left over. And it loses us money, and it also potentially damages our equipment and poses a health and safety risk to our human employees. Which brings me to my next myth, which is the opposite myth, but very, very related. If you put one contaminant into the recycling, meaning something that isn't recyclable, contaminant just means something that's not recyclable, the whole load of recyclables will get landfilled. And I hear this all the time, again, from really well-meaning folks, because they're like, oh, I'm so stressed. Like if I put a tiny little plastic cap into the recycling that doesn't belong, then like all of the recyclables are gonna be thrown in the landfill. So the Ghostbusters are a little concerned about this one. Let's bust it. This is another quick one. Okay, so again, I'm just gonna give you the little cheat sheet. I don't think there's a need to like do the entire, an entire set of slides with this one, because again, I think you know, but let's give you the points. So again, we want to make, we don't want to make you, we want you to follow the guidelines and put only clean recyclables in the recycling bin. But we also don't want you to stress that if you make one tiny little mistake, because this is really complicated because of that lack of producer responsibility. We don't want you to stress that a whole load of recyclables will be thrown out and wasted. So we do our very best to pick out the contaminants, and we are really good at it. But as I just said, it slows us way down, and it causes us to lose money and time, and it could just be avoided for that happens. So there are only a few examples of contaminants that would cause an entire load to be thrown out. If I'm a recycling truck driver, for example, I'm picking up recyclables, I'm bringing them to the recycling center where they look at them and then they pay me. If I'm here to pick up a recycling dumpster at an apartment, for example, and I look down and I see that it's full of diapers, like there's a whole layer of syringes on the top, or it's like just 80% trash. It's just like there's hardly any recycling in there. I'm probably not going to bring that load to the recycling center, because the recycling center is going to say, what are you bringing us here, pal? Don't bring us a dumpster of syringes. And so I'm probably gonna haul that as trash instead. Something like lithium ion batteries, wow, and other materials that pose a fire hazard might also cause a load to be hauled as trash instead of recycling. You can understand why we wouldn't want something that's about to explode and catch on fire to come through our human occupied facility. So continue to recycle mindfully, familiarize yourself with the guidelines, use our app, use our hotline, use our website, our email. I'll send all of these resources out to you, especially if you live in Boulder County, they're really helpful. But know that if you accidentally throw, again, a plastic cap attached to a glass bottle in the recycling bin, we're not gonna throw out an entire load of valuable recyclables as a result. Because again, if you go back to our past myths, it wouldn't make sense for us to do that. We wouldn't throw things in the landfill unless we had to. So the other related question that I get all the time is, for food and drink containers, how clean is clean? And again, I always appreciate this question. And when people ask me, I'm usually like, if you're asking me the question, how clean is clean, you are probably not the problem. Because when I give tours and we go into the recycling center, you will see like, oh, there goes an entire burrito, like, or there goes an entire plastic jug of orange juice, and oh, look, it just spilled all over all the paper. Like, if you were asking me that question, you are not the one putting in a burrito through the recycling. So we just ask that your food and drink containers are empty, reasonably empty, and reasonably free of residue. So sometimes you're out and about, you don't have access to a sink. If that's the case, just again, make sure you drink all your soda or eat all your yogurt or takeout food before throwing the container in the recycling, So otherwise your yogurt is going to spill on the rest of the materials, and we can't recycle paper covered in yogurt. If you do have access to a sink, just give it like a little quick shot of water. It could even be gray water that's, soaking something else. Shake it up for a second and then just make sure it's empty. If it's something tricky like peanut butter, we understand it's hard. Do your best with just like a spoon, a spatula, give it to your dog, whatever you can reasonably do to get the most peanut butter out of there. The reason, again, that we don't want food or liquid residue in our recycling is because it makes our workers sick from mold, first of all, ew. It also attracts rats and mice and skunks and cats, stinging insects, all of this stuff to the recycling facility, which again, if you were a worker, not great. And it reduces the value of materials. Again, like the paper markets are not going to be thrilled about getting a bale that is covered in blueberry yogurt. So again, no need to use gallons of water and soap, no need to put it through the dishwasher. We care about water waste, and recycling saves water. Just like try not to give us something that will spill, mold, or attract, a skunk. Okay, nice. Oh, we're really cruising now, guys. So now we're on myth number 8. And we have 10 total. So these last, this one's easy. The last 2 are a little more in depth. So this one I didn't used to get, and then I got a lot of this myth recently. I don't know like where this is coming from, but some folks, it has become clear to me, think that trash gets sorted through at landfills. So if you put your recyclables in the trash with your trash, they will get recycled somehow. And someone said in the chat earlier that like, maybe I didn't read it. I don't know. I can't read as I talk at the same time, but this is true that, yeah, like people have speculated that in the future, we're going to have to be mining our own landfills because we're so weird in that we keep landfilling really valuable materials. And so then when we start to run out of these materials, we're gonna be like, oh wait, where did we put it? Oh yeah, we buried it in the earth. And then we're gonna mine our own thing that we buried. That is like separate. This, I don't know, people just think that their trash workers are picking through their stuff and they will sort them for them. This is an easy one to bust. We could bust this in our sleep. Bill Murray's like, please give me a hard one next time. So again, I'm just gonna do this like really, really quick with a really quick cheat sheet for you. The answer is no. Definitely your trash workers do not sort through your stuff. Nope. Okay. So that's just not, it's just not the job. That's just not the job that these people were hired for, that they do. It doesn't make financial sense for them to do it. They don't have the infrastructure or the facilities. They don't have like a sorting facility like we do. And it would be a huge health and safety hazard. Think about all the stuff that gets thrown out. Like, would you want to dig through a pile of diapers just to get like a coat hanger out and recycle it as scrap metal? No. Would you feel safe doing that? No. So don't throw valuable recycling in the trash thinking that a landfill worker will go through it for you, because they sure won't. They won't. Okay, that was easy. Easy one. Does waste in California get sorted through like that? I don't know of a single scenario in which that would be true. The only thing that I can possibly think is like, if I was a landfill truck, if I was a trash truck driver and I saw like a bunch of scrap metal that was just like right on the top, and I was like, ooh, that's valuable stuff, because you can cash it in, then maybe I would grab it just like right off the top. But I don't know of a single, especially American landfill, where that would ever happen. Yeah, in other countries for sure, people like, especially waste that we export, like e-waste, for example. I have a whole webinar about that I can send out. There's a lot of people picking through waste to get valuable stuff out, because we're like, put it in the landfill. But I don't know of a US waste system in which you could put everything in the trash and they would sort it out. Yeah, there used to be dirty MRFs where they were mixed. Yeah, it's just not a good system. It has not proven to be safe or a good idea or anything for anyone. Okay, this one is number 9, and we're almost there. The last one is going to take just like a little more time, but this one is not that long. This is, again, one of my very favorites to bust, because most people who ask this or think this have the right idea, they have the right intention, they're trying to do the right thing. And so it's not like talking to a brick wall like the recycling is a hoax one. It's like, oh, now that I understand this one, now I understand the bigger picture and like the goal. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. Okay, so myth number 9 is food waste, yard waste, and other organic materials decompose in the landfill. And we're not talking about recycling in this one. We're talking about compost, which is also zero waste. So lots of folks, some folks don't see the need to compost because they think that if we put all of this compostable material, like food waste, yard waste, paper towels, whatever, and these other organics, they'll just decompose in the landfill anyway. So they're like, why would I subscribe to compost? Why would I build the compost facility? Like, why would we invest in compost? If it just breaks down, like we're putting it in the ground anyway, it's gonna break down anyway. I've had like very, very educated folks ask me this one, very well-meaning environmentalist folks. It's an easy one to think. I understand why you'd think this. The Ghostbusters, like me, are excited to address this one because again, it's a good one. It's not only is it like, again, like you're usually talking to someone who cares, but also it's like you provide such a good solution where it's hopeful at the end. So let's do it. So unfortunately, next slide. All right, thanks. I'm just gonna do the rest of the webinar just with this picture of the Ghostbusters up. Okay, so unfortunately, it is not true that organics break down in the landfill. And just to be clear really quick, when I say organics, I don't mean like USDA certified organic. I don't mean like an organic apple. I mean organic meaning like a material that inherently breaks down. It's made of natural stuff. It'll break down, like, again, yard waste, food waste, wood waste, paper waste, all this stuff that is not plastic that will decompose, you know, if you put it outside. Someone just said, are we gonna have time for questions? I sure hope so. I am almost done. Again, this is myth 9 of 10. We're almost done. This ends we have until 7:30. And always, if I can't, if I don't have time to answer all the questions, I will answer them in a document and I'll send them all out. And I'll do that either way. I'll send you out the questions and answers so that you have them at the end. Okay. Yeah, we have quite a few. It looks like 24. That's a lot. We'll see if I even know the answers to them. You never know. Okay, so when we put organic materials into the landfill, so organic materials need oxygen to break down. So that's really kind of all they need. They're really low maintenance. They just like, there are other things, you know, there's like greens and browns and oxygen and water and all this stuff, but like the main thing that organic things need to break down is oxygen. And unbeknownst to many people, landfills are designed to be airtight. They are airtight. They don't have air in them. So instead of decomposing nicely, like they would in an oxygen-rich environment, organics in the landfill undergo what we call anaerobic decomposition instead of aerobic, which means with air. Anaerobic means no air. Anaerobic decomposition means that without oxygen, not only do the materials break down super slow, like it really stunts their ability to break down, but they actually emit methane as they do it. And if you are not familiar, methane is a powerhouse greenhouse gas. It has a heat trapping capability 86 times more powerful than CO2 in the short term. So when we're talking about you know, our warming climate, when we're talking about the IPCC report of like, okay, time's a ticking, folks, until we like are in this apocalyptic state. Methane is a big one that we really need to get under wrap. Like we need to get control of methane. And landfills in the US are the third biggest emitters of methane into our atmosphere. So, so when we put, long story short, when we put organics into the landfill rather than the compost, not only are they really not going to break down in the short term, but they're also going to crank out methane, contributing to the climate crisis. It's not what we want to do. But there is good news here. This is why it's my favorite, is that there's this beautiful alternative. Sorry, Ari, can you go to the next one? Oh, did I? I didn't change the title. That's good. Good job, bros. So ignore the title. Ignore that title on the top. It's supposed to say organic materials plus oxygen equals aerobic decomposition. So when organics are put into the compost instead of the landfill, they break down into this delicious, rich fertilizer, which means that we're cycling nutrients back into the soil to grow nutritious food, which is, I mean, real recycling. That's what, you know, nature's recycling is. Perfect. And not only does this process not emit methane, doesn't emit methane, but it actually makes, thanks, Ari. Ari's changing the title in real time. It actually makes the soil healthier, which increases the rate at which that soil can draw carbon dioxide, CO2, out of the atmosphere, mitigating climate change impacts. So we talk a lot about trees drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere. And again, CO2 is one of the greenhouse gases that is out of whack. The cycles are out of whack in the atmosphere because of industrialization. And so trees, stuff like trees, are drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere. And that's one of the big reasons that we like things like forests and, you know, the tropics and things like that. And so, but soils, we've found, when we return these nutrients to the soils and heal them through applying carbon-rich soil amendments like compost, they have 3 times more carbon sequestration ability than trees. So we can be drawing carbon out of the atmosphere with these soils once we apply carbon out of it, so, or compost onto them. So not only are we solving the methane problem by not putting organics in the landfill, but we're also actively healing the climate. We're actively drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere when we return those nutrients to the soil. And then it has this entire photosynthetic effect on things that grow in that soil. And I can send you more information about carbon farming, which is another big thing that we've been working on recently. So that's, again, it's good to give a solution, like a yes and, no and, I guess in this case, to this one. Okay, so talking points, we just talked about this. This is the same thing that I just said. We won't waste time on this. Okay, last one, myth 10. Let's go. So for our 10th and final myth, this is probably our most complex myth, but I hear this a lot from folks who genuinely want to help with the waste crisis. So we should incinerate our plastics into energy. We should chemically turn our plastics into energy. There's a lot of kind of ways that this could be phrased. It's sometimes called chemical recycling, or waste to energy, or plastics to fuel, or chemical recycling, plastic to plastic. And basically it's like, we don't need to turn off the tap on plastics. We can turn it into something useful like fuel or like more plastics. And by incinerating it, deconstructing it, it's kind of a broad, chemical recycling is kind of a broad umbrella. So this is my most dramatic Ghostbusters image to finish us off. We need all hands on deck for this one, but we can still bust it. I used to have a shirt of the marshmallow guy because I was, again, really cool as a teen. So I won't really go into the science of kind of what these processes are because there's a lot of different kind of things that fall under this umbrella, but we're just going to be talking generally about taking plastics and converting them to fuel or chemical recycling. Okay, so again, it's a nuanced, complicated topic. I don't want you to think that like I am the expert and I know everything about it. And I am kind of simplifying it, but the bottom line is that from EcoCycle's perspective, we never promote burning materials. Burning trash always has toxic emissions. It's the most expensive form of electricity. There are way cleaner, more efficient ways to get green energy. Like we have the infrastructure to do the other green energy, and burning our natural resources for energy is in no way green energy. So avoiding that waste in the first place and fully recovering it to prevent the destruction of natural resources in the first place is by far a better solution economically and environmentally. There's a lot of things that kind of are argued against recycling or zero waste or reduction, especially when these topics come up, because it's like, well, we don't really want to actually like change the way that things work. We just want to like slap a Band-Aid on it. And our argument is like, we don't have to slap a Band-Aid on it because we know the answer. We can just not do it in the first place, and then you won't have to mitigate the effects afterward. So this pathway, the waste to energy, chemical recycling, whatever, it's linear. It's still very much linear from earth to disposal. Once these materials are burned, they're out of the cycle. So new resources will still have to be constantly mined and extracted from the earth rather than recycled. Zero waste is, of course, about reducing our use of resources in the first place and recovering those that we do use and using them in the cycle as long as we can. And if we really work towards zero waste, we should be able to recover at least 90% of our resources, or prevent them from being used in the first place. Okay, so this started coming up when I first started working at EcoCycle, which was a little over 4 years ago. And everyone was like up in arms about Sweden because they had read stuff about Sweden's incinerator and how Sweden is doing that, doing their trash system. And we got a lot of like, you guys should look into that. You should, call Sweden, see what they're doing. So I'm going to talk specifically about Sweden, but it's like, again, it's a broad umbrella. So Sweden specifically has received a lot of publicity over the last decade for seemingly amazing recovery rates. So they're in terms of the world's, whoa, that was some crazy lightning. I think I saw someone else in the chat talk about lightning, but I didn't see it until just now. Okay, so in the world's best recyclers, Sweden only recycles less than 50%. Boulder, city of Boulder, is doing better than that, for example. So part of the reason that Sweden's rates are lower compared to like Germany, who has 65%, Sweden is really good at a lot of environmental stuff. We love Sweden in a lot of ways in terms of how they deal with their waste. And so you'd think that their recycling rate would be higher, but the reason that it's lower is actually because they built this incinerator. And so Sweden's incineration is a little bit better than norm because they've combined heat and power, meaning they use the steam from the incinerator to heat homes. So they're getting additional efficiency from incineration, but this infrastructure is super expensive, and that's really important to keep in mind. And for that reason, it's not being replicated elsewhere. And so because they've invested so much in this infrastructure, they've set themselves up for this problem. They've built this beast that needs to be fed. So that now that they've built it, they have to feed it with resources so that they get an ROI and a return on investment. So, and they've overbuilt for their capacity. So Sweden is importing other people's waste. And that's because they can't get the ROI they need without bringing in more materials because they have done other environmental things. So this promotes and perpetuates the disposable mentality in a lot of ways. And so you might ask, if they're recycling and composting and this is just incinerating, what's left, isn't that a good thing? But unfortunately, Sweden isn't recycling just whatever's left. They're burning stuff that could have been recycled or composted, and again, from other countries as well, because they built this infrastructure and you have to keep it going once you invest that much money in it. And so plastics to fuel technology, which is sometimes called pyrolysis or gasification, turn plastics into fuels that are burned. And so PTF, plastics to fuels, infrastructure it's been around. It's not new. It's been kicked around for like 50 years or so. There's nothing new about them. And they're largely unproven and therefore never brought to scale. They've never been shown to work. So reintroducing this term and the technology is more of an attempt to make legislators think that there's a solution to all this plastic in the ocean. Like, oh, no worries, we'll burn it as fuel. No need to, get rid of the plastic subsidies. No need to ban polystyrene food grade containers. No, we'll just burn it. Don't even worry about it. So when the real solution, particularly for plastics, is reduction, we know this. We know the solution. We don't need to like entertain many different, like, oh, well, who knows? It's up to, like, no, for plastics, it's reduction. That's what we have to do. Plastic to fuel infrastructure guarantees the need for more extraction and plastics to burn and disincentivizes reduction and recycling. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to create energy, which makes it tremendously inefficient and expensive. There's no place in the circular economy for plastics to fuel. Circular economy was that little graph that I just showed in the last slide, forgot the word slide. EcoCycle and Amber, which is the Alliance for Mission-Based Recyclers, which I mentioned earlier, are opposed to PTF technologies. And in fact, we're submitting a paper on the subject later this month. Okay, so now our talking points here to bust this myth. There we go. Okay, so so we were talking about plastic to fuels. There's also chemical plastic to plastics recycling, which is like purification and depolymerization, which is like you kind of break it down and then kind of build it back up. So that it might have the power to convert plastics back into new plastics products, but not indefinitely, not at the scale. Like, we have so much plastic. This is not the solution to how much plastic we have. It's also not been shown to work on post-consumer waste, which is what we're talking about here, or at real world scales. Again, it was too much. We can't do anything with it. PTP, plastic to plastic chemical recycling will require huge amounts of financial, political, and infrastructural investment to develop into a recycling solution. This investment, if we have money and infrastructure and resources to spend on something, it should be spent on proven solutions like plastics reductions and expanding our existing system, which already works. Like, again, we're not like crowdsourcing for solutions. Like we know what it is, we just have to actually invest in it. And so when we hear, you know, things like this being pitched, we're like, you're trying to take the lazy way out, and it's not like we know what the solution is. And if we're gonna, you know, invest in a solution, it's not this one. This isn't it. We have to invest in the one that we actually know will work. Wow, this lightning is going off. Okay, we're gonna have plenty of time for questions because now it's time to wrap up. We're gonna wrap up here. So, okay. I have some key takeaways here. So these are just like very briefly summarized from the slides. Okay, so you are not the problem. I cannot say that enough. Truly, I cannot. I love you all. I don't want you to feel guilty because I know that, like, I know it's so easy to feel the tremendous weight of the climate crisis and the waste crisis on your little shoulders. No, you didn't do it. But you are the solution. You can be a huge part of the solution. Reduce, again, as a recycler, as someone who's obsessed with recycling, and as a company that does recycling, I and we, EcoCycle, are the first to say reduce and reuse, always. Don't rely on recycling. First, again, we have to turn off the tap. We have to reduce, reuse, repair, redesign, compost, all the stuff before recycling. But that being said, recycling does make sense. It's an awesome system to keep our, whoa, that was a crazy lightning. Okay, recycling does make sense. The system makes sense. It's a great way to reduce our impact on the planet, to keep conserving our natural resources, to keep strengthening our economy, all of that stuff. Plastics, again, it's in kind of a league of its own, but still recycle the plastics on your local guidelines after reducing as much as you can. Follow your local recycling and composting guidelines, share them with your friends, try to reduce contamination as much as you can, but don't pull your hair out and think that we're gonna, like, don't be afraid to like put anything in the recycling because you think that we're gonna throw it all out. We're not. Linear models are never the answer. That's just like a broad, like if it looks like this, it's not the answer. This is what we're looking for. This is what we need. We need to turn off the tap and then we need to do this. Okay, and then I'm gonna send I always send out like a very extensive follow-up email, and I'm always like, I know I forgot something because I'm emailing you guys 70 things in this single email. But so tell me if there's something that you want me to email you, if you want me to include something in this email that I'm not listing, or you can always reply and be like, send me this additional thing. So I'm going to send the recording of this webinar. You can watch me sing the Ghostbusters song again. The slides, so you can use them as reference, and then we're going to actually make like a prettier version of the cheat sheets. So you'll have, like, immediately tomorrow, you'll have the slides and the little cheat sheets like on all of the myths that we made, but then we're also going to make like a better version so you can like have whatever you want to do with them. We're going to send the greenwashing guide that Ari and I made. That is just a good reference for anyone. I'm going to link to the referenced articles to cite my sources and all the stuff that I talked about. Past related webinars I'll send out. We have like a playlist on YouTube of like the past webinars that a lot of them are really relevant. Again, like the environmental justice one specifically talks a lot about the history of oil and gas and plastics. We have an extended producer responsibility one as well. That one's really good, and it talks a lot about what this system could look like where every producer takes responsibility for their own stuff. Also, the most exciting, you haven't seen the story of plastics, it's this Emmy winning movie, feature-length film that we were part of, and it talks just about like the problem with plastics and like what we can do, what the problem is, the history. Again, like that graph that I showed of production is from that, and that we have a free link for you to watch it. Usually you have to pay, but now you can watch it for free, and I'll send you the link and you can watch it for free through November, and it's so good. Also, like, I cry about it, but it's really good to watch. And then I'll send you like more ways to get involved as well. And I just want to finish up with, this is one of my favorite quotes. I look at it all the time. It's in my room. It says, it's by Margaret Mead, and it says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And I love that because again, like these problems are not your fault, but truly you are the solution. And every time I talk to the public, to, you know, people who care about recycling and the environment, I'm so grateful. And also I'm grateful that that is literally all I do. So that's what I do every day, all day. You are amazing. You guys just wrote such nice things in the chat. I will now take time to do questions though. So let me, oh, there you go. Okay. A lot of questions, guys. You can like upvote ones that I think, can you, that you want me to answer first. And if I don't get to all of them, which I have 18 minutes, I will send out a document with all of the questions and the answers, and I'll do that anyway. Okay. You mentioned the shrink wrap plastic on aluminum cans messing with the optical sorters. Any tips on safely removing it? Yeah, so there's this thing now where instead of printing the label right on an aluminum can, producers are shrink wrapping the can with a label, and it's causing this problem because remember when I did my impression of the plastics laser will see that aluminum can and be like, oh, it looks like PETE to me, pachoo, and sort it with plastics. And aluminum, as we've talked about, is one of our most valuable materials. We really don't want to lose it to our plastic sale. So if you see a shrink wrapped can, do your very best to remove the label. I really honestly don't have a tip. Maybe other people do. I always use scissors or a knife, and it's, yeah, I don't want you to cut yourself. Sometimes they have a little like serrated thing to look for that you can just like tear off, but it's really hard. And the thing that I always do also is like, as soon as I see it, I'm like, boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, hello, like producer or like email, whatever. Yeah, like stop. Yeah, Kara says don't buy it, vote with your dollar. But also a lot of the people like are local that I've seen, and they like don't know that it's a problem. And so if you give them that feedback, it's well received a lot of the time. My mom does this all the time. Shout out to my mom who's watching. She's like, hello producers, I'm an eco leader with EcoCycle. Like, did you know that cans are a problem when they're shrink wrapped? Okay. Great. Tennis ball cans are PETE. If the metal ring is removed, do you accept them for recycling? Well, that's a good question. I'm trying to picture a tennis ball can. Ari, do you know? Ari?
That is a good question. I think people can like really hurt themselves on the metal ring. So we're always like, that's real dangerous. I would want to confirm.
Yeah, let's check. We're gonna check with our.
Yeah, some of the ones that if we don't have like a precise answer, we'll ask folks on the team who can give a more informed answer, like folks who are at the recycling center, on like what the official thing they want to say about that. I can't remember. We used to just say no because it's really hard to remove that ring, but
yeah, sometimes we'll be like, yeah, like one would be fine, but if we give so yeah, there was more than 100 of you that were tuned in. If we tell you all to do that, then it might be a problem. So I will follow up on that. I'll send out that in the Q&A document that I send out. Philip says, hi Philip, where does my plastic go after it leaves EcoCycle? So I have a whole other 2.0, it's a 2-hour thing about this, where like, what is each plastic, where does it go, what does it turn into? Geographically, our markets are domestic, but they change. So it's like when you have a bale of like HDPE, for example, number 2, you're like, who wants to buy it? And then people are like, I bid. And so it's not like we're like, I send my HDPE to Joe. It's like, this is changing domestic market. I can very quickly tell you what each thing gets turned into. So number 1 is PETE, and it gets turned back into sometimes like bottles, but so a lot of times like a carpet or shoes or pants. If you see like Athleta is making pants out of recycled plastic, it's a number 1. A lot of carpets also. So you can see that even though that number 1 could be turned back into a bottle, because the folks making a bottle usually aren't buying it back, someone else has to be like, okay, I guess I'll make it into a carpet or tennis shoes or whatever. Number 2 and number 5 are both like really kind of durable outdoor plastics, so they get really turned into like picnic benches or like a lawn chair or like a recycling bin, actually, in fact. so 1, 2, and 5 are kind of the main ones that are recyclable, and then things like 3, 6, and 7s are the ones that are like crap plastics. If they do get recycled and there's any market, it's just going to be like a railroad tie, like just like melted into something big. It's not going to get turned back into like a whatever it was. Yeah, but that's a whole other, I could talk about that for 2 hours. And you can always email me like with more specific questions and we can chat about it. Does aluminum foil burn off when smelted with cans and other aluminum since it's so thin? If so, then why recycle it? I don't claim to know the inner workings of the smelting process, but no, aluminum foil it does get recycled. It's valuable. Like, you know, an aluminum can is also thin. The thing with aluminum foil is that we want it to be in a ball rather than a sheet, because if it's a sheet, we'll think it's paper. And we want it in a ball, and we want that ball to be at least 2 inches in diameter, because if it's smaller than that, it's just going to fall through the cracks. Like if you recycle a single like Hershey's Kiss wrapper, it's just going to fall through the crack. So yeah, aluminum foil is good stuff. Just try to scrape it if it's like covered in cheese or whatever, and try to put it in a ball that's at least 2 inches wide. Okay, can we get references? Yes, absolutely. I have all my sources cited, and also I'll send out the slides, and they have like, if I have a statistic or an image or whatever, I'll be like courtesy of this link. And then I also have a lot of it's just like from like the EPA and stuff, and so I'll just send out those references in I'll just make a document of this like sources cited, and I'll send that to you. Always important to know where your stuff is called, or where it's coming from. My dinner time is here and my brain shuts off. Okay, should we call it single-use plastic? I do. I don't, is there like a movement? Is there a movement for another term? I don't know. I call it single-use plastic because it gets used once. There's probably a lot of other ways to talk about it. Okay, where do the subsidies come from plastics manufacturers? This is actually probably one that could be a whole training that I wouldn't give, that someone else would give who works more on policy. And I can give you a more in-depth answer, and actually maybe someone else on this webinar could, but it's a government subsidy. There's also a subsidy for logging, and it's just kind of like, use our domestic resources, you know, like drill our oil and gas, like cut down, like log our forests. And so there's these subsidies that exist. The logging one is really interesting because it started because of colonialism, of imperialism with this country. So when we came over here, we had all these forests, and we were like, well, we have to create farmland, we have to create, you know, spaces in which to live. And so we like logged all these trees, and we were like, oh, well, we can make paper because we logged all this tree. Guys, I'm losing it. All these trees, we can make them into paper, even though paper had already been made for, you know, centuries before that, like out of rice, for example, things that make far more sense to turn into paper because they are not dark and are not woody. They don't have all this lignin content that trees do. And so the only reason that we started making paper out of trees is because we had to like colonize the land. And then we have these subsidies that remain to this day that are like holding up the system that doesn't even make sense anymore at all. It was just this thing that kind of made sense at the time. It doesn't make sense for us to continue to make paper out of trees. We shouldn't. We should be making it out of hemp or rice or any number of other less lignin containing plants. And also, yeah, like we had the subsidy that is incentivizing like drilling new oil and gas, cutting down new trees, when like that is so not what we need to be doing right now. But as I said, you know, like the oil and gas industry, the plastics industry just has such tremendous, you know, political power and lobbying power. But that being said, I don't even know if I mentioned this. We had we passed our most comprehensive, most powerful zero waste recycling plastic related bill of all time at the state level in Colorado last month, 2 months ago. I think 2 months ago. And I'll send out more information about that now that I think about it. Because like we've been gaining so much momentum and so much collective power that we've been able to undo all of these policies that the plastics industry put in place in our legislation many years ago. So that's really exciting that we're like finally undoing it. And hopefully, yeah, that subsidies will come next. Okay. How much of that recycling market money is from plastics recycling? Other than 1 or 2, is it profitable to recycle even for 1 or 2 without subsidies? Yeah. So as I said, recyclers make their money selling materials. That's what the business is. And as I said, we not only don't really make money on plastics, we lose money on plastics. And that's because there's not a whole lot of value attached to that stuff, because there's not a whole lot of demand, because the plastics industry doesn't buy it back. So as I said, there's like this third party who has to be like, okay, I guess I'll buy your #1 PET bottles and turn it into a carpet, but like, it's not like, you know, that carpet is going to go to the landfill probably. Like, it's not like I would love these bottles. So we don't, yeah. But then, so not only do we not sell them for a lot, but then we lose money because we have to spend so much time sorting out all the other plastic crap that comes through. And also we have to buy things like the lasers that sort the plastics, which are expensive, and the sorters who are like physically sorting all the plastics. So between, you know, those 2 things, we're not breaking even on plastics. We're losing money on plastics, even those #1 and 2s, which are more profitable than something like, you know, 4. And so what we do as a nonprofit is we're like, okay, we don't love plastics, but we'll take them and then we'll offset those losers that don't make us money with the winners, like metal, aluminum, those, you know, cardboard historically. And so then since cardboard and aluminum, all that stuff is really valuable in the recycling markets, we're like, boop, and then we'll hopefully break even and we'll take all of it. And so that's like, for example, why we don't pay you to give us metal, because we have to use it to offset what we're losing on plastics. Okay, if we have a choice of buying food packaged in aluminum or glass, which is better? Ooh, that's a great question. It's kind of a judgment call, and it really depends on where you are. So here in Colorado, especially in the Front Range and Boulder County area, we have a closed loop on glass, which means that all of the facilities, all of the folks that are involved in recycling glass are like right in the area. So like our closest glass recycler is Momentum, and they're right over there in Broomfield. And so when we sort your stuff, it goes through our facility in Boulder County, it goes to Broomfield, and then it goes to one of the local bottlers, which are also just right here in the Front Range, and then it can be back on the shelves in like 2 to 6 weeks. So in Colorado, especially, you know, like in this area where that is possible, I say glass is a great option because we have this infrastructure, and like we have kind of not similar to the incinerator, because that was a negative thing, but here we have this amazing glass recycling infrastructure. So we like don't necessarily buy more glass, but definitely like we need to make sure that everybody's recycling all the glass they have to, you know, actually fill that infrastructure. Aluminum is also great because so they're both infinitely recyclable. Aluminum is you know, also as locals we can make it. It's not that same like Boulder County local, but it is light, so it has less transportation impact. So either one, it's a judgment call, but like I always choose one of them over plastic, for example. But yeah, they're both infinitely recyclable. They're both good stuff if you can't have a reusable option. Ooh, my throat's getting sore. What types of packaging can be returned to the supermarket over and above their plastic produce bags? Over and above their... Are you... I think you're asking, sorry, if I'm just like, my brain can't read it. I don't know what's happening. Are you asking what goes in that that plastic bag collection? That is,
I think it's like other than plastic or produce bags. Like what else? Like what kind of Amazon packaging? Like what can, like stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, so
that's how I'm let us know if we're wrong, Jan, in the chat, because
jar off that was scary.
Oh no.
Okay. Yeah, there's a plastic bag and film collection at the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, the Charm, which we also run, as well as the regular recycling facility. And then they also have collections at supermarkets a lot of the time, and they collect, yeah, like plastic bags, like a regular shopping plastic bag, a bread bag, you're correct, great. Like a newspaper bag, all these things. And then there's additional stuff that can go in. Basically what you need to know is that it's what they're looking for is a number 4. So when I talk about the plastics, there's like 1, 2, and 5, which are like generally pretty recyclable. There's 3, 6, and 7, which are like, we hate them. And then there's 4 is like a little special middle child. And 4 is a hard to recycle plastic. And it's because when you put these stretchy films into the regular recycling, it jams up our machinery, but there is a market for it. So it checks the markets box, but not the infrastructure box that I talked about, which makes something recyclable. So you can take those things and put them in the separate collection so it doesn't have to go through our infrastructure. And so it's, yeah, stretchy plastic bags. If you rip it and it rips in like a ripple pattern, like a jagged pattern, then it's stretchy. Then it can go in. Also, just if it has a number 4 on it, you don't really have to test it. And then there's other things like, yeah, there's like a mailer, like a bubble mailer, which is all plastic, not the one with paper on the outside. Those can go in as well, as long as you cut the label off. Bubble wrap, let's just like, regular bubble wrap. There's like a
foam packing sheets.
Film, yeah, the packing sheets that are kind of like, they kind of feel like foam, but they're like stretchy, like thin things. And then shrink wrap, generally actually is not usually a number 4, but like if it's like if you buy like a big thing of toilet paper and it has like that really stretchy film around it, and you like, again, if you ripped it, it would rip in a ripple pattern, you could give us that big guy, but not necessarily like something that is genuine shrink wrap is usually not a number 4. Yeah. Okay, when in doubt, throw it out. Yeah, so when in doubt, throw it out is like a recycling motto. That's just, again, it's like, it's addressing one of those myths that I talked about, which is, if I have something, should I should I put it, if I'm not sure, should I put it in the recycling or should I put it in the trash? And generally they say put it in the trash because, again, like we don't want all these contaminants going through recycling. But EcoCycle, because we are so special in that we do so much work on outreach and education, our motto is when in doubt, give us a shout. And so we have, I'll send these resources out in the email, but we have like people that you can, if you call 303-444-6634, we have people picking up the phones, answering your questions. You can email, recycle at email.com is not what it is. Recycle at ecocycle.org. You can email me, which is Rosie at ecocycle.org, always with questions. We have an app on our phone. Oh, my phone died. Wherever you download apps, it's called EcoCycle A to Z, and you can be like tennis ball. You can like type in whatever you want, and we'll tell you whether you can put it in single stream, whether you put it in compost, Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. If there's someone else who's not us, who we know will take it. Like if you can mail it back somewhere, take it to like the Humane Society, whatever. We have a website with the same kind of like searching search bar. So we say when in doubt. So yeah, like when in doubt, throw it out. Generally, just like don't, throw your blender in the recycling if you're not sure. Don't throw your jeans in there. But like call us, use your resources before you just like throw everything out that might be otherwise recovered. Okay, I contacted a brewery that had shrink wrapped their cans in plastic labels. They said to just toss them in the recycling with the labels on. No problem. Is that true? No. Boo to that brewery. Thank you for calling them, asking them about it. And again, a lot of the time, like it's because the producers themselves have been told like further up on their supply chain, like whoever they're getting their whatever from is like, oh, don't worry about it. Like this is the deal. And they're like, oh, okay, great. And even if they have the intention, like they specifically buy a coffee cup because they think it's recyclable because the people that sold it to them told them it was, again, it's not like they don't know. So with the plastic shrink wrapped aluminum can, again, the situation is that we have lasers that are looking for number 1 plastic. When they see that aluminum can, they sort it as plastic. In our facility, that is the issue. Like that might not be what, like, again, facilities are different all over the place. So that might not be what they think, but that is what's happening. And then we have to like literally have people be like, oh, I have to grab all these cans out of this plastic bale. And it's a huge waste of time and energy. So no, yeah, it is a problem. They should change it. We're working on like, how can we fix this at an industry-wide level rather than just like calling all the breweries and fighting with them. But yeah, they should know that it in fact is a problem, and you can always like copy me on emails to them. We can be your resource to that. Okay, I struggle with getting all trace of paper labels off plastic bags that I recycle. Okay, so generally labels and stickers in the regular recycling bin are not a problem. Like if you recycle your spaghetti sauce jar and it has a label on it, totally fine. You can, like your plastic salad clamshell has a sticker on it, leave it, it's fine. But the special, the mailer and like plastic bag collection, they don't want stickers. So rather than taking them off, which is close to impossible, I cut it off. So just cut off the part that is a label with scissors and then leave the rest. And they just don't love it because they melt it down to make Trex decking, like that composite kind of plasticky lumber. And they don't have all the like built-in stuff that the rest of the recycling world has to get rid of labels and stuff like that. Okay. Okay, Ari says that she used the app. Yeah, my entire job is to know what's recyclable, and I use the app every day. There's so much stuff out there, guys.
Yeah, because when we built the app, we went through every single item and confirmed. So I was like, I can just ask the app instead of asking someone else.
All right, so tennis ball containers and lids can be recycled. If you are able to remove it safely, the metal ring can be taken to charm and recycled with small scrap metal. Nice. That was me tying a bow on it. All right. Is it true that when there is a trace of detergent in a laundry detergent bottle, it must be thrown away because it will contaminate the plastics when recycled? I don't think so. It is a problem if it's a hazardous waste thing, like a pesticide or like I can't think of a literal single other hazardous waste. But we have the hazardous waste materials facility right behind our facility, and it's free to Boulder County and Broomfield residents. And so if you think something is hazardous waste, you should bring it to them before you bring it to us. But I don't, Ari, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I don't think detergent, like, again, do your best to make sure it's empty, maybe give it a rinse afterward.
Yeah, I feel like with that one, it's like if you're getting towards the end, like before your last load, store it flipped over so it's already as much as drained into the cap as you can. And then sometimes like when I'm putting, because I have a top load washing machine, like I'll put some water in it and shake it around and then dump it in when I'm about to do the load because it's about to get water put into it anyways. But if there's like a little bit of residue, it's okay, because also when you are recycling that, you're screwing that plastic lid on, and then when a recycler gets it, they're melting it down, and I don't think it causes too much of a problem.
I don't know why it would be different than like any other, like shampoo bottle is fine.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Someone said, yeah, laundry sheet. There's a bunch of plastic-free detergent options out there that are cool. Okay, electronics are being dumped. Okay, this is a whole environmental waste question, and I have great news for you. We have an entire webinar on that because I can't even talk about it. Can't even get into it. It's a huge problem. Yes, we export a tremendous amount of it. EcoCycle Charm takes e-waste, takes electronics to recycle. Our in-house partner is called Blue Star, and they have the highest e-steward certification, which means we do not export it for sure. All of it stays domestic. None of it is dumped anywhere. And also they specifically employ folks with disabilities, autism specifically, and it is awesome. So I can send you the, again, it's on the playlist that I'll send. It's an entire electronic waste webinar. Okay. What about legislation? We have 6 minutes. Let's do it. What about legislation forcing standardization of plastics to a specific recycle? I confused myself just then. What about legislation forcing standardization of plastics? Oh my God, it moved to specific recyclable plastics to enable enforced recyclability. Yeah. Yep. That is what we would love to see. So yeah, part of the bill that we just passed effectively bans food grade polystyrene, which is number 6, which is our least favorite one. Probably yours too. And so yeah, stuff like bans is kind of like what we have to do for now, because the ones that we hate specifically are continue to make stuff out of them because they're the cheapest. Like polystyrene, you would not believe how cheap it is to make. So yeah, that's our approach. But yeah, the idea with EPR, and again, there's an entire webinar that we did on EPR, extended producer responsibility, is yeah, that if we held these producers responsible for their own crap, then they would be making stuff out of specifically recyclable plastic and not any of the crap plastics, because they would care, because they would see it again. They would be the ones to have to deal with it. We also really push for minimum post-consumer recycled content laws, which means like, hey, if you make a new bottle, it better be at least, 50% post-consumer recycled plastic, because you can, so you have to, you should. And those, that's part of EPR as well. So all the stuff that we're working on, we have a whole policy, legislation, research team. Why do they spend the money to wrap the zucchini in plastic? Yeah, actually, great news. We also have another one on food waste, because it's kind of a trade-off of like, food waste is a huge environmental issue as well as a human issue, and plastic can mitigate that to an extent. And so there's some plastic that is there for a reason, and it does help, big picture, prevent food spoilage, but also a lot of it is so stupid. Like when they wrap an orange in plastic, you're like, if only nature could have come up with a wrapping. It did. It's called an orange peel. So a lot of it is like, again, it's so cheap, and it's like convenience, because, like I like Trader Joe's. It's so bad about that. I don't know why. But again, a lot of it comes back to what I said, is like, it's not just like, oh, we have a problem, let's solve it with plastics. It's like plastics is like, get all the plastics out there as much as we can, because we have to ramp up production. We have to like put it everywhere because we're losing fossil fuels elsewhere. So part of it is like, there is some plastics certainly has use, like medical plastics, great. Like we've done so much stuff with plastics. There's this other whole group of plastics that are so dumb and should have never been made and continue to be useless and like do nothing but choke turtles and be consumed by us as microplastics. So yeah, some of the food packaging is there for a reason, and some of it is just because they put plastic on everything. Okay, can you get Safeway to sell only cardboard egg cartons rather than their styrofoam ones? Personally, no. Kroger has been one of the companies that has like we meet with them. Like EcoCycle again meets with industry folks. We meet with producers. We like are part of all of these big conversations, and Kroger certainly has been there. I don't even, is Safeway even a Kroger? I don't know, but regardless, that's like our plastic bag ban, affects them. And as far as egg cartons, I don't know of anything that's like really specifically about that, but I will say that I have seen far less of the styrofoam egg carton packaging than I feel like I used to. And that, again, you can always give that as like consumer feedback. Like I won't like, again, vote with your dollar, but also like, feedback sometimes is well received. And I don't know if there's like a larger movement, but the hope is that like we can pass these big bills, that are producer responsibility related, and then those specific things will fall under those umbrellas, if you will. Oh, a TerraCycle question. I was wondering when we would see that. Okay. What do you think of TerraCycle? Is it really worth it to send boxes? Yeah. TerraCycle is, I have to use the remainder of the time to talk about, we're over. I thought it was 29, it's 39. All right, well then I really will wrap up. I will end with TerraCycle because it's a great question while we're talking about producer responsibility and greenwashing. TerraCycle is a mixed bag. I am saying this as kind of my opinion. I don't even know if I can speak for EcoCycle on this. I'm going to try to speak for EcoCycle, but some of it might just be my opinion. And a lot of it is we don't have all the information to form a real opinion about what's going on with TerraCycle, because the main issue is that TerraCycle it doesn't tell anyone what they're doing with anything for the most part. They have a huge lack of transparency, and it's like exceedingly more and more becoming obvious to people. And they actually just got sued. They got in legal trouble really recently for this because they're like unable to produce what they're doing with a lot of their stuff. So part of the problem is like what you said, like how worth it is it to fill a box of trash and ship it to New Jersey? Like probably if you're trying to limit your ecological footprint, that's probably not a great start, even though you're obviously trying to do the right thing there. But then the second thing is like they'll be like, buy a zero waste box and just like put all of your trash into this box and we'll sort it out for you, which is like, again, like not incentivizing anyone to do like the real solutions that already exist, like recycle and compost in your local facilities, reduce as much as you can. Don't just like rely on this like behind the curtain wizard to like deal with your trash. And so my understanding is that, you know, as I said, markets is a huge reason for whether something is recyclable or not. And so the reason that TerraCycle will take all this stuff that other recyclers won't take, like a candy bar wrapper or like a cigarette butt, they will say that they take cigarette butts. It's because essentially they don't have markets that will buy them. Essentially they charge you to get a collection box, and then they create their own market with it, meaning they'll like melt it down into like a bench. And so for some of the stuff, that's like fine. It's like, it's good to, you know, divert a bench-sized amount of candy wrappers from a landfill, but also like there's only so many benches you can make, and it's not circular, right? It's still linear. And then for the other stuff, it's like, what can you possibly be doing with a cigarette butt? There's no way. And you're just putting this big Band-Aid all over the real issue, which is like, we need to reduce and reuse and recycle and figure out actual sustainable solutions, not just like, oh, like put it in a box and like the wizard will take it away. So that being said, they do have some really cool stuff that they're doing. Like they spearheaded the Loop program, which is like going back to the deposit stuff, like like from the ad in the 50s. So like the milkman model, basically, if you order Haagen-Dazs, if you get Haagen-Dazs, it'll come in a stainless steel container. You eat all the ice cream, you return the stainless steel container. Awesome, we love that. We love circular economy. They also do some partnerships with brands, which is like essentially their version of producer responsibility, where they're like, hey, Crayola, do you want to partner with us to take back your own markers? So yeah, the mixed bag is like some of the stuff that they're doing, like some of those really specific brand partnerships where you're like, I know that my toothpaste is going to go back to Tom's of Maine. What Tom's of Maine does with that, I'm not sure, but like at least, you know, we're involving the actual producer. And the Loop stuff, the reusing stuff is good. As for the like the zero waste box and shipping it all over the place, we're not fans, because just again, it's just like, if like as recyclers, we're like, TerraCycle, like what are you doing with those candy wrappers? We'd love to be able to recycle them. Like, what are you doing? And they're like, we'll never tell. And so there's like this big legal conundrum about it, because they don't have transparency. And of course, as we learned with the China national storage situation, transparency is so key in recycling, because if people like create, you know, conspiracy theories about it and they don't trust that we're doing what we should be doing with our waste, then like we're not going to get anywhere. So whoo, it's my TerraCycle spiel. And that, okay, it is 7:43, so I feel like I should wrap up. I will spend the next one, maybe 2 days putting together this beefy old email, and I will make sure we're going to save the Q&A box, so I'll just make a document of like all the questions, and then I'll answer them. Even the ones
made the document, Rosie.
What?
I got the document. I pulled all the questions already.
I already did it.
Amazing.
Great. And I'll also the chat box too, because it's always cute and cool, and a lot of people have a lot of great ideas and facts and resources and links and stuff like that. Great. Wow, I'm again out of breath. I need to go like use my inhaler. You guys are all amazing. I am so grateful that you spent your Tuesday night with me. I know there's lots of other stuff to do. You could have watched the lightning storm. You could have watched Ghostbusters. There's time. There's always time to watch Ghostbusters. Yeah, you're all the best. You are the reason that EcoCycle can do what we do. I will send that email to you soon. I will answer all your questions. I will send all the resources. If you think of other questions, feel free to just email me. You have my email from all the invites. It's just rosie@ecocycle.org, or you can just wait for me to email you and then you can reply. And I give these webinars every other month or so. So I will see you hopefully at the next one, and if not, some other time. Yay.